All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of Saber Sims DFS office hours. It is Tuesday, January 17th of 2023. Got a 4-game NBA slate, an 8-game hockey slate, and we could possibly be looking ahead a little bit to golf on Thursday. A little bit of a strange golf tournament this week. Had a question about it already come in, so happy to talk about any golf looking ahead. But for those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Andrew, one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions that come in the office hours channel over in our Discord server. If you are not joined up in our Discord, there is a link in the description below to get joined up. Highly recommend it. As always, a lot of good conversations happening over there each and every day. If you're just tuning in, have questions, throw them in the live YouTube chat. That is a great place. I just peeked, and Patrick is already hitting some of the hard-hitting questions. We can definitely talk about some of the issues FanDuel has been having, but quite a strange situation over there. We'll talk about it further. But for anybody tuning in, throw your questions in the live chat. We'll get to all the questions before the end of the show. Promise you guys that, as always. Gonna get SaberSim pulled up here. Had one question. And I'll just answer Patrick's question first. What's your hot take on the FanDuel debacle? It is really, really crazy. Frankly, I don't think it's good, for DFS in general. If one DFS giant can't, get their act together, be consistent, or it's not cool to cancel slates. I'd say, Saturday was like really crazy. I was entered on FanDuel for the 2-game Saturday slate, and they just wiped it. They wiped the FanDuel NFL Saturday slate, the MMA slate, and then I think yesterday they were having more issues and ended up canceling the after hours NBA slate. So not really sure what's going on. They just went through like a really big redesign with their lobby, and so it seemed like they were trying to make some improvements. Maybe it's an effect of that or what, but interesting to see FanDuel, making some UI changes, and then showing some life, trying to do something with their DFS product, and then now going and having all of these issues over a 3-day period. So kind of weird. Really hope to see them, fix this and get back to stability. I think it's better for the DFS ecosystem in general. But FanDuel is gonna FanDuel, I guess. So had one question here from Rum Runners. He clarified it a little bit for me. For anybody playing golf this week, I think this is just important to know and be aware of, right? For the American Express tournament this week, kind of a strange tournament. They are using 3 different courses. Players will be playing on 3 courses over the course of the weekend. I don't know the exact format or how every player, plays each course. If it's like the cuts after 3 days, I'm not sure. If anybody's aware, you guys can let me know. But question that Rum Runners had, which I'm sure other people will have. This week, there are 3 courses being used in the PGA tournament. Say one course plays 2 shots harder than the other 2. I would like to be able to easily minimize or eliminate exposures to players who are on the harder course. This is mainly for showdown contests, but could be used on the main slate if one day is expecting worse weather conditions. So one thing, I just wanted to mention in regards to this. So we do know, which players are playing on which courses on which day, right? So if you're playing, I'm assuming this isn't going to be as big of a problem for the weekend, because I'm assuming every player will play on each course. But if you're doing Showdown, right, and, there are a group of players that are playing on course 1, and course 1 is quote unquote 2 shots easier than course 2. So you might want to play more players from course 1 in your Showdown contest, right? We know that. We understand what players are on what courses. So you should probably be able to see that in the projections, right? we don't have the ability to, show you which course a player is playing on. That is not going to be in the app for you to like build groups off of or anything like that. But you will be able to still see tee times. What I would do is if, you are interested in building groups based on what players are playing on which courses on a given day. If you're doing showdowns and things like that, I would go and get that from somewhere online. I think the PGA Tour does really good with data and tee times and course information. You could go in, you can go online, search that, find it, and then come in here and build groups, right? Like do some manual groups, group these players out. Might be a little time consuming, but if you are somebody who wants to get that granular, that's what I would suggest. That's what the team suggested. I took that back to the team, and that is basically what they suggested people do if they do want to build groups like that. But just be sure that if we know that John Rahm is shooting on course is playing on course 1, which is easier, and Scotty Scheffler is playing on course 2, which is harder, that is going to be reflected in the projections. So not something we feel that users actively have to worry about, but if users want that extra control with rules and groups, go online, find those courses or course groupings and create groups in the app. That would be the best way to go about it. But I saw that question came in. Golf is a growing sport, probably one of the most active growing sports in the DFS ecosystem. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in the golf streets this weekend. So wanted to get that out to everybody. But that being said, if anybody has any questions, now is a great time to get them in. I actually do not have any more questions in the Discord. We touched on Patrick's question here. Looks like Uncrabby Cabby just dropped one in the queue. Said, hey, Andrew, do you use the sims to help determine with going a more balanced build of exposures versus a more exploitative build? This is a good question, Uncrabby Cabby. I would say that, the way, how would I say this? I play different sports differently, and I've learned what type of player I am in different sports or even different formats over time. I think a good example for me is probably NFL. For NFL, in NFL Showdown, I like to consider myself what would be considered more balanced. I'm pretty flat exposure or leverage across the board, especially for captains. That is a result of my process and of a lot of trial and error. But if I were to go and play an NFL Classic slate, like a main slate, I'm probably much more exploitative. I've just found over time that those two different strategies for those two different sport types tend to lean better into like the type of player that I am. I think that, if you are trying to find inferences for whether you want to be exploitative or balanced on a given slate, I think a research build helps a lot, right? If you go into a research build and there is just like minimal positive or negative leverage in one direction or the other, what that would probably say to me is that you're probably playing a well-priced slate. So I think that, on a well-priced slate, I think this is probably a good one. Just looking at this right now, that, our highest value play is 5.54 points, points of value, which is fairly low, right? In if you play basketball regularly, you're going to see plenty of values over 6. That is when like the leverage really starts to open up. And then, sometimes we'll get leverages, in the 7s. I mean, values in the 7s, values in the 8s, where plays are just really, really good, right? So I think that, based on the value of the slate will kind of determine whether or not you should be more balanced or more exploitative. And then, coming from this value perspective, I think a research build would show you that, right? If we were to just run one right now, I'm going to make 2 quick adjustments to projections here, and then I'm going to run 5,000 lineups, and we're just going to let this build. But yeah, I think that, based on slate context, you could determine whether or not you want to be more aggressive or not in that instance. So I don't think that, I think a research build reinforces that idea, but I think that, some of the slate components that we can see in the home screen can give you a pretty good idea of what direction, what type of slate this is going to be, right? So I'm going to open this up to 5,000 lineups here. I'm going to sort by leverage. We're seeing a lot of leverage to Jeremy Sokan. I think that, one thing I do want to caution is that on these slates where there is not as much, value, you got to save money somewhere. And these slates get interesting because I think what happens is that, the field will just gravitate towards whatever play is going to save them money and pack in points per dollar, especially using a traditional optimizer, right? And on a slate like this where the value is not that high, my my intuition and my experience has kind of led me to believe to be cautious of these plays, right? On a different slate with some value, we might not be seeing any of these guys that we're seeing so much of today, right? But that's why slate context is important. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, just because there's nowhere else to look does not mean that these guys are now a smash play. So just be a little cautious in that sense. I think that's all I'm really trying to say at the end of the day, is just be a little careful with, well, there's no other value, so I'm just going to jam in these guys who are like kind of value. I would be careful. Like, this is a slate where I would probably be a little flatter rather than take these really big stands on wherever the builder seems to think there is some sort of value, right? So I would be probably a flatter on some of these guys like Sokan and O'Neal and Curry on a day like today. But I think that, there is definitely something to be said where, there are days where you could be more exploitative, and then there are days where you could be less exploitative. I think some of these slate context, slate dynamics can lead you in that direction and help you figure it out. But I probably would do some more thinking in the home screen prior to running a research build. But really good question there on Krabby Cabby. Patrick said, does min uniques make a difference in PGA? I had 90% Tom Kim. So, Patrick, I'm pretty sure that, min uniques would help any type of, exposure adjustments. We talk a lot about how using min uniques can organically really diversify your pool and organically move exposures around for lots of players at once, right? You're kind of putting the builder in an awkward position for the builder, right? You're making it solve a problem, making it make a decision, right? Like, you know what? Two players have to be different. Like, and that's not what the builder wants, right? The builder wants to play, those top 20 and jam in what it perceives to be the best expected value plays, right? But that's because the builder doesn't understand diversification, doesn't understand risk management, and all of those things that you as the human, in this man plus machine environment needs to take into account, right? So because the builder doesn't understand those things, you need to, like, ask it questions and make it think and put it in these hard situations. So when you say, two players must be different in every single lineup, now the builder is put to a test and has to figure out who is least valuable, right? And who is most valuable. And what it will do is it will keep the players that it perceives to be most valuable and move around the positions where the players are a little more, equal or can be swapped out and not lose that much EV, right? So we could just do a test of this. I think that's probably a good example here. I'm going to open this up to 150 lineups and, top exposure, Cam Young. Like, let's see what happens to Cam Young as we increase these min uniques. I think, one thing off the bat, we're not going to be able to get this min unique value that high, mostly because there are only 6 players in the lineup, but that's fine. We'll take what we can get here. let's open this up to 2. And Cam Young went from 50 to 55 to 50 here. I'm going to drop this down. I want to see how far down in my pool we are going as we apply these min uniques. Cam Young down to 34%. So at this point, we are saying that 3 out of 6 players, so half of the lineup, must be different in every single lineup. We're only at lineup 752. I think this is totally fine. In a normal golf slate, you're not going to need the optimal to win on most days, right? 100, usually like 160 golfers in the pool with a cut. You probably will not need the optimal. So I think it's totally fine to use min uniques here. I think one thing that's really interesting is that, if we go back down to 1 min unique here, we saw Jon Rahm at about 41%. And then we saw 4 guys above him, right? Burmester, Fowler, Jason Day, Cam Young. And as we increase this to 3, all 3 of those guys, Day, Young, Burmester, have dropped. And what this is telling me is that, Jon Rahm is the most valuable piece to consistently continue to have in your lineups. That should come as no surprise to anybody. He won the first event 2 weeks ago, and then, is just one of the top golfers on the tour. I believe is the highest salary guy. So that all makes sense, but it is really interesting that, when you put the builder to this test, that, you might have thought off the bat that, Cam Young is the best play of the slate, right? He is, our top exposure and the only guy above 50%. But then as you put the builder to this test, it is actually telling you that, I think Jon Rahm is actually the best play of the slate. And another way you could probably figure that out is by using this pool exposure. He's coming up about 5% more in our pool of lineups than any other golfer is. I think that is probably another signal that he is probably a really good play. But using min uniques has a lot of value in golf, in my opinion. The only thing I would be worried about is, you're going to see these really low owned guys probably start to get jammed in here. I haven't looked at this slate at all. I don't know if Adam Hadwin and Ricky Fowler are good plays or not, but this is a lot of ownership for really low owned guys, right? We see a 1% owned Hadwin, a 0.1% owned Fowler, a sub 2% Burmester, sub 1% list, and the list continues, right? In that sense, not trying to make a pun there, but that is also a result of using min uniques, right? If you are forcing in min uniques, you are forcing the builder to get different. So the only way the builder can do that is by playing plays that he was not playing already, right? So I would be careful. One thing that you could do is check to see the exposure to like the lowest projected plays that are getting into your lineup, right? One lineup with Brian Stewart, I'm not that worried about that. Some of these look okay. I think the builder is going to do a very good job in general. Pretty interesting that Landry here is matching his pool exposure. So so far, everything the builder is doing, I'm okay with, right? I think what would concern me is that, if I only have 15 Van Ruin lineups in my entire pool and 10 of those were being used in my 150 as a result of my min uniques, I would probably be pretty concerned about that. So those are the things that I want to caution you guys of. When you put the builder to the test, it's going to have to make decisions. You just want to make sure that it's making the right decisions or decisions that you are in agreement with. I think what we're seeing here is perfectly fine. I don't have any issue with the way the builder is handling this. But you should spot check those things. I think that's kind of the message. Spot check what the builder is deciding to do when put in a hard position and determine if you're okay with that. Are you okay with, double the pool exposure to Luke List at sub 1%? And if the answer is yes, great. But that is something you should be spot checking and making an active decision on rather than just not looking and letting it fly, right? So I would just encourage you guys to, do some spot checking, make sure you're comfortable with all of those decisions based on some of these diversification efforts that you are making. But really good question there, Patrick. Happy to talk about that. Prince Fan said, hello there. I have been unsuccessful in every PGA golf tournament I have tried to play. I use default settings in SaberSim and choose the lineups that are generated. Do you have any tips? Prince Fan, I think that some of the things that we just talked about are really important. One thing I would say that I don't know how many contests you're playing or how many lineups you're building on a given slate. Would really recommend building as many unique lineups as you possibly can. Get a good amount of 20 max and 150 max lineups. Balance that with your elevators, your single entries, and 3 maxes, following the DFS profit plan. If you're not aware of the DFS profit plan, you can find it over on our YouTube channel. It's a great resource for contest selection. We talk about it all the time. You can find it under this new here, start here first, start winning more with our DFS profit plan. Golf is a high variance sport. Golf is a sport that does not have a lot of correlation. Ownership is usually very accurate. If there was ever a DFS sport that was closest to being solved, it would be golf, and that makes golf a very hard sport, right? So I would be careful with your bankroll investment. If you're playing within that 2.5 to 5% range, I would probably play on the lower side. Golf is ultimately a very hard sport to beat, so I wouldn't get too discouraged. I would exercise bankroll management. I would try to play as many unique lineups as I can and get in, as many, 150 max, 20 max contests as possible. So, I'd probably lean more on like the 75% range for my diversifiers and then lean more on the 25% range for my single entries in 3 max, as opposed to being closer to 50-50. If you check out that video, you'll understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about if you are not already familiar with it. Patrick said, we just want to find the TJ McConnell in every slate. Yeah, dude, guy has been nuts. I think I saw he was like 9 for 9 with like 4 for 4 from 3. Sounds like a 99th percentile outcome for him. I would not expect that of him on a regular basis, especially off the bench. All right, Marky Mark said, what's your recommended minimum filter projection on an NBA player? I think this is a really good question. So if you go over to our NBA, an NBA slate, we are going to have a default filter in here. And I believe the default, I was messing around with some stuff earlier. Let me get rid of this. So I believe that if you go to a new NBA slate for the first time, I'm going to try this out. There should be a default filter here. And the filter, I believe, should be set to 13. I can't get it to recreate because I already got rid of it. But usually the default filter is set to 13 by default. What I have done since we have come out with the new sim diversity change is, it used to be sim variance. It's now sim diversity. The way the slider works is a little bit different than it used to, but it is ultimately better than it used to. I've actually loosened the reins on the filter. I like to set my filter even lower to something like 7. We can see that there are 63 players removed at a 7 projection filter. If I'm going to change this to 13, which is the default, that's another 13 players that are removed from the pool. I don't think it's wrong to leave it at the default. I think the default is fine, but I'm at a point where, I trust SaberSim so much that I am okay giving it more control and allowing it to put even lower projected lineups in the lineup as it sees fit. And I do some spot checking the same way we were just looking at golf. I will run a build like this one here, and then I will come into the build, after I have kind of made my adjustments and done what I've wanted to do, and then see at what rate it is putting the lowest projected plays into my lineup. And, what I will do is that usually involves coming down here and looking at these plays and seeing how many of them got into this lineup. I don't know what the projection filter was set at for this build. It actually looks like it was set to about 18. So the projection filter was not letting anybody below 18 into the lineup. Let's go into the home screen. Let's set it to 7, and then let's see what this looks like, right? So I'm just going to run 1,500 lineups here just to save a little time. But We've done this test on the stream before. I think one thing that we've really noticed is that even with additional control or additional, loosening of the range, SaberSim still does a really good job of not getting the worst plays into your lineups. So if we were to go down here, and sort by projection, we're looking at the top 150 lineups here. We changed that projection filter to 7. We see our first player comes into play at 11, right? One lineup in 150 with Vlatko Kankar. This is the only lineup he is in the entire pool, right? I'm interested to see what this lineup looks like. I can hit the magnifying glass to find the lineup with him in it, right? The first things first, this is our 32 ranked lineup. So it's not, right at the edge of our 150. It's pretty high up there, right? He is questionable. He is min priced. This gives you an opportunity to just do a quick spot check. Maybe you go over to Basketball Monster and see what the injury situation for Denver is, right? I'm pulling it up over here on the side. Looks like Bones Highland is questionable and nobody else. Looks like everyone else is in. It is a 4-game slate, pretty short slate. And, maybe, if Bones sits, then he could be higher up in the, off of the bench list. So just this gives you an opportunity to say, you know what? I'm okay with this one lineup taking a shot on this guy, or you know what, I don't want to play it and I can just trash it and find a different lineup. But I think that, what's really interesting is that these players are under 13, right? This is one player under 13. SaberSim is putting this guy in your lineups at the rate that SaberSim thinks he is okay to be played. So like SaberSim saying, yeah, in one lineup out of your 150, I think it is okay to play this guy. And I would probably leave that lineup, especially on a 4-game slate. You got to get different, really low owned. I'm totally fine with that play. I think, where it kind of gets interesting here is that, if we were to, so we lowered that threshold from 13 to 7. There was only one player in one lineup used below that range. So, the builder does a really good job of fading these guys in at the rate that it perceives they should be in your lineup and not playing bad plays. There was a similar question, why is the min salary lowered to 48,000? It used to be higher. It's the same concept, giving SaberSim more control. If we were to look at all your top lineups, we are using all of the salary. Just because we're loosening that, it's more of an example of the builder doing what it is supposed to be doing. So over time, I've gained a lot of trust of the tool. That comes with experience and usage. I think the more you use it, the more you will learn what it is really good at and figure out where its faults are, so you can find those things. I can't think of any off the top of my head because, the team just does a really good job of addressing those issues and figuring out ways to account for that. But good question there, Marky Mark. So, in other words, the lowest number to set, Patrick said, I set mine at 0 now. Patrick, I've talked to Jordan. I know Jordan does the exact same thing. Jordan sets it to 0. I like to have, some threshold, but I think setting it to 0 is fine. And you can run builds and go in and look and see what it puts in there. So nothing wrong with setting it to 0. And, especially on small slates, right? Especially on like these 2 gamers, these 3 gamers, these 4 gamers. I have a lot of trust in the tool. I think that is totally okay. Follow up to this conversation. Patrick says, speaking of projection filter, how do I get rid of the default setting when opening up the NBA slate? Sometimes I tend to forget to remove it if I was building a lineup 2 minutes to lock. This is a question that came in. I saw there was some discussion internally around, this in regards to our support team. Like Patrick saying, like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, if you open up tomorrow's slate, the first time you open it, it should carry over whatever the last projection filter you used was. I don't think that's happening 100% of the time. So the team is aware of it and looking into it. But just a note for everybody, whatever projection filter was last used should carry over to the next slate, similar to the way rules work, right? If you have a rule, maybe like no more than 3 players from one team, that rule should also carry over to the next slate, so you don't have to continue to set it and use it every time. So Patrick, the projection filter thing is something that we are looking into, and should have some more info to come on that in the next week or so. Mark said, would you get players in lineups with zero projection? So based on our test, we lowered it to 7, and we still didn't get any players at that low of a threshold. So the answer is no. And then he said an X mark should be present when you select the filter. So usually if you set a filter, whatever players do not meet that filter will be automatically unchecked from the pool. So just so you guys know, any filter, these guys will be unchecked as long as this filter is active. You can choose to hide these players using this little hide remove players icon, or if you want to see them, you can uncheck it and they will be visible to you again. Patrick said, default projections save you from making a disaster mistake, but I'm a high risk type of player. I'll take my chances. Will SaberSim allow me to build lineups with no projections, but use ownership projections instead? I asked because I feel like MMA and PGA doesn't really need projections. Frankly, I don't know. I've never tried that. That is, a very strange concept. It kind of blows my brain a little bit. You're basically saying that, I don't care about projection. I only care about ownership and exploiting ownership. I would be very careful with that concept. I think that, if that's something that you're interested in learning more about and thinking more about, I would post that in the Discord, right? A lot of sharp minds in the Discord. The Discord is a place, especially the channels where, other SaberSim employees and staff are around, are actively participating in discussions in the channels. If that's something you're thinking about and want some feedback on, go into the Discord, post it in the golf channel, and see what other people have to say, right? I mean, we have a lot of sharp people in the community, and it is definitely a conversation starter type question there, Patrick. So I don't really have any thoughts on it myself about, using no projection and only exploiting ownership. I think there's a salary component there probably. Something that would probably make a little more sense to me would be to set everybody to the same value. Then players are really treated equally, right? And then the ownership is really the only thing that is different about them, right? If I have John Rahm at, zero projection, and then I have, Burmester, who was somebody who we were talking about at zero projection, that kind of matters. I guess if all their projections are zero, then all of their value is the same as well. But I think that it might be pretty weird to set everybody to zero mean projection, but definitely a conversation starter. Would throw that in the golf channel and see if you can get any feedback there. All right. Hopping back to Discord, question here from Luke Diesel. Question says, do you like stacks in NBA, or do you just let SaberSim do its thing? For the most part, I'm not actively searching out stacks in NBA, and that's mostly because of correlations, right? We can see, I just clicked on the highest projected player here, Nikola Jokic. He is very uncorrelated to in a positive way to basically everybody on the slate, and has some slight negative correlations, but just in general, basketball is a low correlation sport. So I'm not looking to capitalize on stacking for the most part. I think the only thing I'm doing with stacking is making sure that I'm not getting too big of stacks, right? I know a lot of people use a no more than 3 players per team stacking rule. That's mostly because, the number of fantasy points in a game is limited. And if one person is shooting, that means another person is not shooting, and that limits upside. But that being said, I think that there are times where allowing more than 3 players from the same team into your lineups is definitely viable, especially when teams are missing star players, especially when teams are resting. And in those situations, I like to allow for it. So I'm somebody who doesn't set the rule, And then what I will do is I will come into the post build here, and then I will just check my team stacks. Am I getting any 5 stacks? There's a lot of Brooklyn 5 stacks, right? But I'm also getting a lot of them in my pool. So that makes me feel a little more comfortable about it. What do these stacks look like? Why am I getting to these stacks? I know that Kevin Durant is out. Is that enough for me to feel comfortable playing this many Brooklyn 5 stacks? That is kind of where it comes into play for me. I like to look at it more under this lens. Pretty interesting that, we have 22% Brooklyn 4 stacks in our pool, but we have none of them. But then we're, kind of jamming in the Brooklyn 5 stacks. I think in a sport like basketball, I'd probably be leaning more toward these 4 stacks, which we have higher pool exposure to, than these 5 stacks, which we have lower pool exposure to. And maybe I try and even out that distribution across my set of lineups. But I'm more spot checking in the post build, letting the builder do what it wants to do. I don't think it's right to come into this build and you're basically discounting, if you set that rule, 22% of the lineups that SaberSim wanted to build, that SaberSim believes to have the highest expected value. So that is okay. I had 5 stacks filtered. That's what was messing me up there. But if we unfilter it, now we're getting a lot more of these 4 stacks into our pool. But getting back to my point, you are discounting, this 22% plus this 7%. That's like 30% of lineups that SaberSim thinks belongs in your top 1,500 lineups. And, a percentage of those that end up in your top 150 that you were just saying no to. I think that's probably wrong. I think you should let the builder build those and then come into the post build and then make a decision about how many of those you want to take with you into your lineups, right? I think that's why hard and fast rules I typically advise against, because slate context, slate dynamics are so important. A 4-game slate as opposed to like a 12-game slate, the way you approach those should just be very different, right? And allowing for that nuance that the builder is able to account for and going from there is probably the best approach, in my opinion. All right. Uncrabby Cabby said, how are you handling high projected players that are low owned but with low pool percent? Good question. I would say that I'm probably handling them cautiously. So, for instance here, let's see what we're looking at. If I were to sort by projection, I don't think we're seeing that on this specific slate. I think mostly because we are so limited with our player pool. But I think that there's something to be said, about those plays specifically. Player is probably highest owned on the slate. They're low owned, but they're showing up in a low amount of pool. I think that says that one thing, I think ownership is fairly good in NBA. So there's probably a reason that player is low owned, right? From an industry perspective, that player is probably low owned for a good reason. But, these players have high upside, right? You can see that in the percentiles. If you go back to the home screen, you could come in here, sort by projection descending, and see that, what these players' upsides are. Maybe you sort, or no, we were talking about projection. So, come in here by projection and see that, Jokic is like the only guy pushing 80 for his, 95th percentile. Kyrie is a close second at a big ownership at a big salary discount, which is probably why we are seeing a lot of him, but which is probably why he is also twice as owned as Jokic. So that all kind of makes sense to me, but I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to get to some of those high projected plays that the field is not looking at, that have huge upside, and playing a little bit of them, right? Maybe you play them, at their ownership. Maybe you want a little bit of leverage on them. I think it's okay to play them at a rate that you're comfortable with. But I think that ownership is generally pretty good. So I'm not trying to get too crazy with them, jam them in for like every lineup in my pool. But I'm definitely, taking note of, this player is the highest projected player, but is low owned. There's a reason he is the highest projected player, could easily be the highest scoring player on the slate. maybe I want to play some of them. And I think that's totally an okay approach to come with. Marky Mark said, no more than 3 is my set rule for NBA except for 2-game slates. Yeah, I think, having these exceptions is important. I would challenge you and say, why not for 3 games? Why not for 4 games? Why do you make this rule for only 2-game slates, right? We ran a build without that rule, and we saw so much 5 and 4 game stacks for Brooklyn specifically. So, do you want to, cut all of those lineups out right off the bat, or do you want to at least think about it a little bit? SaberSim is telling you to think about it, and do you really want to do that for this slate, and then make a decision? But at least run a build without that input and let SaberSim give you some thoughts of how it thinks you should play this slate prior to going and setting that hard and fast rule. I think if you run the build, run a test build, and then, you see the outputs, and then you say, I still want to use it. I think that's fine, but at least you took the time to contemplate that approach and were a little more open-minded about it, as opposed to being closed off and just running with that heuristic no matter what the slate context is. All right, Patrick said, I wanted to run the majority 5-1 and 4-2 stacks in last night NFL Showdown, but I had some 3-3 stacks pop up after the build. When I hit the subtract, the 3-3 stacks are gone. I'm just confused. Where are the other lineups that supposed to fill the deleted 3-3 stacks? Also, the trash button, I'm confused by that as well. Be glad you have a job, Andrew. I know Brett Maher won't later this week. Brett Maher, I don't know what happened to him. He was, I play season long, just like with family and friends, and he was like a really good kicker all season long. I remember him hitting like multiple 50-yarders, was like a top 5 kicker in season long over on ESPN. I'm pretty sure when I had checked, that was probably like week 13 or so. So really sad to see him, just kind of fall apart last night. Thankfully, it didn't cost his team the game. Hopefully he can bounce back. But interesting. We'll see how that situation unfolds. Yeah, Neil's with me. Maher was awesome this year. Got the yips. He will be fine. Yeah, I thought he was good all year. From what I can remember, I didn't go back and look at anything, but I thought he had a pretty good year. So thankfully it didn't cost his team the game. So I think if you don't cost your team the game, you might get a second chance there. So hopefully he comes back strong next week. But getting back to this question, I do want to talk about this. I think this is really important as we get into playoff football, a lot of showdowns, especially with the formats, right? I think this is probably a Saturday, Sunday thing here. 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday. So if you guys are aware, when you're playing these classic slates, when you're doing stack types, right? We do not count defenses as stacks, right? So if you have a QB plus 2-1, where, maybe this is a Patrick Mahomes with Kelsey and Jerick McKinnon, but the Chiefs D is in the lineup, we are not counting the Chiefs D as part of the stack, right? That would essentially make it a QB plus 3, but we don't want to do that. So defense does not get counted as part of this. If you are playing Showdown, we do not count defenses as part of a stack still. So that's where using stack types with hold on, I went back to the wrong week. That's where using stack types in Showdown is a little funky. I think, this is something that the team is aware of and that we want to fix, but just as like a note of caution to everybody, if you are using, stack types as a big part of your Showdown, framework or thought strategy, I would be a little careful with that, and I would instead build out group rules. So if you say that, I want to use 4-2 in favor of Dallas, what I would do is I would build a group rule for that and say, use at least 4. The reasoning, I'm gonna demo that right now. We have these 4-2 stacks, right? If I were to click on these, some of these might be 5-1. I think for the majority, it's going to be good. We're spot checking this. These are all 4 twos, 4 twos, 4 twos. But you are going to get like some sneaky stacks in here where it might be like a 5-1 because the defense is part of it. So I can't find any, right off the bat, which is good, right? For the most part, this is going to work, but I would just be really cautious of that in general. Let me see if I could do something here where I come in and pick the Cowboys defense. So I'm doing like a 4-2 with the Cowboys D. You know what? Maybe we change this. I could be wrong here. Which I'm actually really happy about. I didn't know the team had made this change, but it looks like we did. There was a point where we did not include defenses as part of a stack, but it looks like we do now. So, shout out to the team for being on top of this and being even ahead of what I'm doing here. This is great. This makes stack types more viable, but my note of caution out the window. Shout out to the back end team and the front end team for making this change. So you can disregard what I said there, Patrick, but I think it's totally okay to use stack types then if that's the question. Let me reproduce. I had some 3-3 stacks pop up after the build. When I hit the subtract, the 3-3 stacks are gone. So anytime you hit the minus, this is going to show you like lineups that are not 3-3, right? So I have 20 lineups here. If I hit the 3-3 minus, it's going to say like, show me the lineups that are not 3-3. So there were 9 3-3 lineups here, and we are not looking at those anymore. We are now only looking at the 11 4-2 and 5-1s remaining. So whenever you use that, it just goes in this little filter up here. You can just click on this filter, and then you can get rid of that. And conversely, if you hit plus for the 4-2, it's going to show you only the 4-2s, and it'll show you 10 out of the 20 were 4-2s. If you want to go back to the 20, just come in here and get rid of the filter. But that is what is happening when you are using the filter icons. That is how to use them. That is what they are doing, sorting your lineups. It also does it for the pool, right? If we hit -3, it's going to it's not going to show you the 185 lineups that were 3-3. It is only going to show you, the 315 that are 4-2s and 5-1s. So that is what the filters are doing. But good question there. Definitely worth clarifying for anybody using those things. I'm glad we figured out the defense thing. I'm really excited about that. Probably will be using some more stack types in my process. But looking here, that was our last question. Thank you everybody for coming on. We had no questions at the start of the show. I talked about a question with run runners that we had already kind of worked through and just to get the show going. But appreciate everybody coming on and asking questions. Patrick on Krabby Cabby, Prince Fan, Marky Mark, just calling out some of you guys here that I'm seeing in the chat. So if you guys have any questions that come up, throughout the day as you guys are building, throw those in the Office Hours channel. That'll get us started while everybody, tunes in and asks questions and participates live. So appreciate you guys all. Good luck in your contest, and I will see you all tomorrow for our Wednesday show, 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on the SaberSim channel. But until then, take care.